Ladies and gentlemen, I am Cindy Freeman, and I am really pleased to be presenting this webinar on how to tell stories where you are the villain with the fantastic story studio instructor, Brad Lawrence. So Brad, I'm gonna hand this off to you.
Thank you, Cindy. All right. As I said when we were sort of casually chatting there, I was kind of surprised that so many people took to this as a topic because normally a lot of the reaction I've gotten to this sort of notion is, people are kind of scared to go there a lot of times. Uh, but that sort of begs the question, why do you want to tell a story in which you are the villain? And there are a few different reasons. Number one, when you can learn to tell a story about times when you were the bad guy, times when you were not on your best behavior. If you're a performer, if you're a storyteller, if you're someone who's trying to develop a lot of stories, that opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. Oftentimes in stories, we fall into sort of, generally speaking, kind of one of three characters. We're either the hero, the victim, or the villain. And most of the time, people kind of tend to sort of view their stories from the perspective of themselves as the hero or themselves as the victim. When you can open up the realm and those stories when you have not done the right thing, when you have acted selfishly or not in the best interests of the people around you, you suddenly have a whole new palette to work with and a whole new set of stories that you can develop and add to your repertoire. So in a purely sort of generating material kind of way, that's one thing. Number two, I also think that it really increases your credibility as a storyteller, your honesty as a storyteller. When you can tell a story where you were not on your best behavior, that really can really sort of communicate something about your level of self-reflection, your level of putting yourself out there, and your level of honesty to the listener. And I am here to tell you right now, all of us have been the bad guy. All of us have acted selfishly. All of us have acted in our own self-interest. All of us have acted in our own self-interest and sort of self-justified in some way to convince ourselves we were not acting in our own self-interest. We have all of us have gaslit ourselves into gaslighting others. And all of us have acted out of frustration or anger or a sense of false righteousness. Why? Because we're human beings, and that's what human beings do. Human beings do great and noble things. Human beings do stupid and selfish things, and all of those traits are wrapped up in all of us, each of us as an individual. We all come to some point where we look back on our own behavior and think to ourselves, "That wasn't good. That was not. I was not being the best me in that moment." And finally, that brings us to the final thing I think speaks to the importance of being able to tell a story in which you're the villain, is that it's an opportunity to reflect on your own life through a different lens. And it's an opportunity to know yourself in a different way. And that's also an aspect of storytelling as both a craft and a practice. It is a way of looking at your life and framing your experiences. And when you can look with a jaundiced eye at those times when you didn't do the right thing and sort of walk yourself through what led to that moment, you become more informed about who you are as a character and a person. And that is never a bad thing. That is always a good thing. Now, that does bring me to one caveat for this half an hour webinar today. When you dig into stories in which you were the bad guy, you can get into some deep stuff. You can get into some deep, dark material. You can go to some very touchy places, and it can take a lot to sort of unpack that and kind of dig into that sort of dark content and that side of yourself. In a half an hour free webinar with no Q&A section, it would be irresponsible to dig into that necessarily on this format. With the interest this webinar has generated, maybe we will actually do a longer version of this at some point. But today I am going to concentrate on two things, technique and strategy, sort of very practical storytelling, craft techniques and strategies where you can tell a story in which you're a bad guy and remain relatable and human to the listener, right? And so in that vein, I have chosen the story that I'm going to use very specifically for that purpose. It's a little bit on the lighter side. We're not going to like the darkest side here, and that's for a reason, because I want to keep this discussion today on techniques and strategies to keep you relatable and human while telling a story in which you're the bad guy. So let me just go ahead and jump into that sample story that we're going to use to sort of break this apart today. All right. I did not come to New York and immediately start teaching webinars online. Actually, when I first came to New York, for the first few years I was in New York, I actually worked in the archives in the basement of Columbia University's library, and I lived in Brooklyn, which meant that I had an hour and a half commute every single morning, which was not a big deal for me. I love the New York City subway. It's the eighth wonder of the world as far as I'm concerned. And I can also always use an hour and a half to read by myself. Like, that is fine. And my commute was pretty calm, was pretty easy, never that big of a deal. So it was fine. But if there is one great nemesis the New York City subway has, it is a gentle shower. A rainstorm can bring the New York City subway to a sudden grinding halt. And I knew I was in trouble one day when I walked out of my windowless room in my windowless apartment and outside to find that it was a total downpour. It was a complete downpour. I was already running late to get to my train, and I'm wearing like a wool coat and a wool sweater and jeans. And it's like, this is going to be miserable, but I don't have time to go back in and change things. So it's like, I got to do this. So I just head out into the rainstorm. By the time I get like 3 blocks to the subway, I'm just soaked. I'm soaked through in like wet wool and denim. And I feel, and like as I get down into the subway and onto the platform, I'm already feeling like both clammy and sweaty at the same time, which is disgusting. I just feel disgusting. By the time I get onto the platform, which is overloaded because so many people do the rainstorm, they're not people who would walk normally or drive their cars normally are taking the subway today. So it's jam-packed on the platform, and even more packed when the train pulls in. It's like 2/3 as many people in the train, or more people in the train as the doors open. And we all, of course, like because just like shove ourselves in there, and we're all like up against one another, and like I'm trying to like work my way into the middle of the crowd, and I get to this spot where I can stand up, but I can't like reach a pole or a handhold, and I have to press my fingers against the ceiling of the subway car as the doors close, and then it rumbles off, and I'm just sitting there like being jerked and like knocking the guy next to me, and the guy's looking at me like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I am in the same boat you are here, man. And it's just like an hour of stopping and starting and stopping and starting to get to Chambers Street, which normally is 20 minutes away. But it takes me an hour to get from my stop to Chambers Street. And the entire time, sardine into these people, I was feeling so claustrophobic. We're all up against one another. My face is like in some guy's moist armpit, and I'm miserable. Everyone's miserable. We're all miserable together, and that's not a bonding experience, right? We're not like joined in our misery. We're just hating each other. And then the doors at Chambers Street, they open, and they stay open. And then a voice comes on and says, and I'm like, what? After like 10 minutes, we all realize the train's not going any further. What the voice is saying is that the tracks are flooded, and we've got to find a different train line. So all of us, I'm just like trying to claw our way out from under one another and then up to the surface world where we can all just like run around in a panic trying to find our train line. And the thing is, I loved my job at Columbia. I did. I always loved my job at Columbia, but recently we have gotten a new manager. And that new manager, Freddie, as so many new managers do, came into the job and looked around for what needed fixing. And what he decided needed fixing was me. Freddie's been looking for a reason to get rid of me from like day one. He doesn't like how I do my job. I don't like how he does his job, but he has more power than I do. And I know that when I'm an hour and a half late to work, Freddie's going to look at that and just like knock it down as like one more reason to get rid of Brad, because subway trouble is the excuse every New Yorker has and no New Yorker accepts. And I know what's coming, and I'm scrambling around. My glasses are fogged up trying to find any other train that's running, and I find a D train. And I get down into the D train, and I'm standing there, I'm doing that thing where you're sort of leaning, looking into the darkness, waiting for those little balls of light to come because that's your salvation. And I'm just pacing in a little circle. There's no room to move on the packed platform and looking again and looking again. And finally, there's the lights. And the lights of the D train are pulling in and the doors open. And it's, of course, as packed as the last train was. And I jam myself in there. And I'm thinking about how when I lose this job, I'm going to tell my roommate this. My roommate's great. He loves me. Mike, he's a great guy. But what Mike's going to think when I report that I've lost my job is like, how many months rent can Brad have socked away in the bank account for when he's unemployed? And the answer is, I have no money in the bank account. There's nothing. Like if rent goes, if my job goes, there goes rent, and I'm just an albatross around Mike's neck, and he's not gonna love me that much longer. But I'm on a train, I'm making progress. And the D train takes me up to 86th Street, and it stops, and the doors open, and now I've got to find a 1 train. So I'm wandering again through the water, trying to get over to the 86th Street 1 train, get to the 1 train, get back into another packed subway car with a bunch of other moist, pissed off, angry, resentful people. And we get to 116th Street. And finally, after 2.5 hours, 1 hour late to my job, the train finally pulls in at 116th Street. And I fight my way to the door before it's getting ready to open. And I can already see him. I can already see him on the inner side of the door. That guy. There's that guy in every New York City subway station who's standing right in the doorway when the doors open. And before the doors open, he's there. And then he's laughing and smiling at his friend, not a care in the world. And the doors open, and there he is wearing sunglasses. It is raining outside. He is underground, and he's wearing sunglasses, laughing with his friends as the doors open, and this train full of pissed off late commuters are just trying to get out of the train. And I have had enough. This is it. It's over. And I reach out and I grab a handful of this guy's deltoid and I say, get the fuck out of the way, man. And I push that guy out of my way, just hurl him. And I'm gone. As I'm walking away, I hear him say, asshole. And I'm like, fuck you. And I'm out and to my office, and I walk in, and Freddie gives me the look, and I sit down in my wet woolen denim as it goes cold in the air conditioning, and I'm miserable. 3 days later, it's a lovely day. Just beautiful. New York could not be sunnier. My commute is so smooth. It's an hour and 15 minutes. I arrived to work early. It's great. I get inside, Freddie's busy, has no word for me. I sit down, my workload is light today, and around noon, I get a call to bring a rack of books from the library to another building on campus. So I'm pushing this rack of books across this idyllic campus, and I see, sitting on a bench, studying, the guy that I had shoved out of the way. And he's sitting on a bench, still wearing his sunglasses and reading with his fingers. And that is when I realize I pushed a blind man out of my way. So, take me as an object lesson. And in the future, if you see me on the subway, gritting hard and gritting back on whatever frustrations I feel, it is because I am going to hell. And I'm not sure anything can stop that now. Okay, that's the story. And that's the story that I'm now going to use to kind of break this thing down, right? When we talk about storytelling, we teach storytelling at a Story Studio workshop, we talk about a great many things, right? We talk about structure, we talk about the notion of a controlling idea and themes and how you edit a story. But one of the things we talk about is how you make a story come to life, right? And how you do that is through the use of scenic detail. And this is where we're going to focus today. Scenic detail is described through the 6 senses. 6 senses are sight, sound, smell, taste, feeling body, and thinking mind. Now, the first 4 are pretty self-explanatory. There's sight, sound, sounds your early warning system, smell and taste are very intimate, very evocative emotions. But now we get to these 2 last sets of scenic detail. These are the ones that are really your friends in a story in which you're the bad guy. And that is feeling body and thinking mind. Because you're not a sociopath. We're going to work on the premise that you are not a sociopath. And when you set out that day, when you're telling the story of this a moment when you were the bad guy, when you say pushed a blind man out of your way, you didn't wake up that day and set off into the world saying to yourself, today I'm going to find a blind man to assault. That's not what you did. There were a series of events that led you to do something that is out of your normal civilized, member of society character. And that these two sets of scene detail, feeling body and thinking mind, are how you put someone in your shoes and walk them through that evolution from normal person who means the world well to Dick who pushes a blind man out of his way. All right? Feeling body. Feeling body is more than just about touch or texture or how things feel to your hands, right? Feeling body is about your emotions, because emotions live in the body. We call them feelings for a reason, right? Feeling body represents a set of common physiological responses to emotions that are both universal and also can be used to create specific nuance. You get embarrassed, your face gets hot. You get upset, your stomach turns into a knot. You get scared, the hair stands up the back of your arms, right? There's also ways to make it specific and nuanced. My favorite example of this is I had a student who was, he was born in Ghana. His grandparents were in Ghana, but he grew up in London. And so about every 4 years, he would go down and visit his grandparents in Ghana. And then he'd go back to London. But one year he goes down and they have brand new puppies, and he really bonds with this one female puppy, just that's his dog for the summer. Then he goes home for 4 years, comes back 4 years later. That dog is now old enough to have puppies of her own, and one of them is stillborn. At this point in the class, I always say, does anyone know what dogs do with stillborn puppies? I'll just go ahead and tell you, they eat them. And so my student described hearing the crunch of those tiny little bones in the dog's jaws and seeing this beloved animal do this horrific thing right in front of him. And I said, great, how did that feel? Where did that feeling, that revulsion, where did it sit in your body? And he said, it was in my stomach. And I said, your stomach go hard? And he said, no, liquid, right? It's specific. It's universal. We've all had that liquid, loose feeling in our stomach, that disgust, but it's specific, right? And it makes things come alive and it puts someone in your shoes. So in my story, I talk about feeling both clammy and sweaty from all of the wet wool and denim. I talk about feeling like I have my face in someone else's moist armpit and jostling up against the guy and feeling like I'm claustrophobic, I'm trapped in the train and I can't breathe and we're all sandwiched in there. And then the panic of running around in the rain, trying to find, another subway to get to. And all of those things are meant to sort of put you in my shoes. You felt that. You have felt trapped in a subway car in a tight space. You have felt what it's like to wear damp wool or damp denim. You have felt all of these things. You know those feelings, and you know that sort of that growth, that wanting to get out of those stuff. You know how that feels. So that makes it a common feeling, and it puts you in my emotional state, right? This brings us to thinking mind. In any story you're telling, you are our point of view, right? We're on a ride along in your brain. So we're getting all of our information from the world from you. So you've got to let us in on what's happening. What are you thinking? What are the conversations you're having? How does one thought lead to the next thought? What are the debates you're having about, like, what you're going to do and which direction you're going to go, and trying to solve problems? The dialogue you're having with others, either imagined or real. What are you saying versus what are you thinking? How do those things differ? Right? All of these things put us in your point of view and keep us in your point of view. So in the story that I just told, at certain key points, I fill you in on the pressures that are on me, like my job and having a new manager at work, and how that has created an added stress on this already stressful situation of being in the subway car, and the stakes that are weighing on me as this is happening. And then later I talk about my roommate and how I have this great relationship with my roommate, but I'm aware that that can all be ruined if I end up out of work from this job, right? And then I get to I finally get to my stop, and by that point, I hopefully have built the frustration. You've been along on this ride with me, and you can see how frustrated I am when I get to the subway stop and the doors open, and there's that guy in front of me, standing there with sunglasses on in the subway, blocking my path, and how I've had enough. How, like, all that frustration, I've been walking you through it, keeping you in my head as that frustration is building. And here's the point where it's gonna pop, where I can't take any more. And I literally push a human being out of my way because I am so frustrated and angry and feel like so under so much pressure. And under that pressure, under that false sense of righteousness, I reach out and do the wrong thing. I lay hands on another human being and find out later that not only do I lay hands on another human being, I lay hands on a vulnerable human being. And there's nothing to say for it. At that point, that's actually where I kind of let it drop. And that's another thing you can sort of play with and work with, is at that point, there's no defense. When I find out that what I've done is pushed a blind man out of my way, there's no defense for that. And so you'll note that in the story, I say nothing in that moment. I let that sit. There's no defense I can offer. There's no excuse. You've been along for the ride. You know what I did. You know what I was thinking when I did it. And now you know that I have found out that what I did was not only wrong, but inexcusable. So there's nothing to say for it, right? And that's also, you can sort of, it's about give and take. Like, when do I feed that information, and when do I not need to? When do I know that you can see as plainly as I can see, this is bad, right? That's thinking mind. So again, the six senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, feeling body, and thinking mind. And when you're telling a story in which you're the bad guy, feeling body and thinking mind, those two are your most important tools. They put someone in your shoes and help them see how you evolved to rationalizing yourself into doing the wrong thing. That you're not a sociopath, that you got there step by step. And in that vein, I just want to talk about one sort of point of strategy. When it comes to structure, there's a lot of different kind of structural things you can do. There's the notion of starting in the action. Oftentimes, we will tell people if they have a story that takes place over a large period of time, or has a lot of technical details, a story that involves medical stuff, legal stuff, or some kind of really shocking thing that happens towards the middle. Well, tell them to start in the action. Take a little piece of that shocking climax, put it up front as a little teaser, then get people into the action so they are invested by the time you work your way back to that big shocking thing. I am going to say, in a story in which you're the bad guy, don't. In a story in which you're the bad guy, that you want to be a linear story, because you want to sort of take it step by step and guide people through how you got from point A, normal citizen, to guy who pushes a blind man, right? You want them to be along for the ride, to know what you know as it's happening and experience it as you're encountering it, right? I think a linear story arc is better for a story in which you're the villain. We are coming up on my time very, very quickly. And from a practical standpoint, strategy and technique, I think those two things are the most vital things I can impart. On another level, digging into the dark stuff, facing the darker parts of yourself, the bad choices you've made, and there are much worse choices than pushing a blind man out of the way that I could talk about today. It's a process, but it's a valuable process, and I recommend you to give it a shot. Go to those dark places, and don't be afraid of it. You don't have to ever tell a story until you're ready to tell that story. You can work on it in your home. You can try it out in front of friends, see how it goes, find the place that makes you comfortable with revealing that side of yourself. Give it its time. But when you're ready, man, it can be a really valuable story to have in your arsenal.